CNN's Biden infomercial, and there's no dumbest bill in America this episode. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and he's back, he's tanned, he's rested. The millennial joining me today is Garrick Ross.
Rested? Oh, I missed that memo. Mark,
yeah, not rested.
Been buried in the books. Oh, life has been, it's been a cool, pleasurable 4 weeks here in law school, and yeah, you know.
So Garrick is in law school, and it's kicking his butt, that's my understanding.
No, I'm kicking its butt, but it's taking a lot of energy.
But he's learning by Zoom, apparently.
Yes, Zoom
He's
school.
not even in the classroom.
Yeah, if you want to know what that's like, you know, it's got its ups and downs, but more downs than ups.
Good to hear. So welcome back. And of course, we have Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Katora, our producer. And this podcast is called CNN's Biden Infomercial. Why? Well, because you may have heard our previous podcast where President Trump was on ABC News with George Stephanopoulos, asking him a bunch of questions with
grilled.
Also the studio audience, if you want to call it that, because there may be 5 or 6 people there, but they were all picked, randomly by ABC News to ask the president questions, and they just grilled it was just planted questions, very obvious, but not so with CNN. Theirs was an infomercial.
Yeah, this is my complaint with debates and live studio audiences. I think debates take the audience out of it. You get a panel of moderators from like 6 or 7 sources. You get your candidates on stage, and you let the sources ask a question, one per thing. It's the best way to do a debate. Everything else is just, it detracts it, because you get things like,
But these were town halls. So Trump did a town hall on
That's
ABC,
the same concept.
and I agree with you. So your point is well taken, which is, well, who decides the questions? Well, of course, on ABC News, it was clearly George Stephanopoulos, a Clinton operative. And on CNN, it was Anderson Cooper.
Who doesn't exactly have the most loving relationship with the president, but has a very loving relationship with Biden.
Or anyone with an R behind their name, unless they're criticizing other Rs.
Yeah, I mean, Anderson Cooper, as Politico described it, looked like he was meeting an old acquaintance for the first time in a long time for some drinks. That's how chummy the two of them were together.
Super chummy, exactly. Both gray-haired guys who it's like, oh yeah, remember that time when? So we have a clip of the planted Trump question number 1. So we have a series of clips. First from, of course, the Trump town hall, where you hear the planted questions just grilling the president. And of course, they're agenda-driven questions.
Yeah.
But never were there any friendly questions or questions that, in my opinion, were balanced. Not so with the Biden infomercial. Of course, they were all love fest questions. So here's planted Trump question number 1 with George Stephanopoulos. And here's a panelist, I guess, or one of the people watching who asked this question. And here's the clip.
For you?
Hello, hi. My question is, if you believe it's the president's responsibility to protect America, why would you downplay a pandemic that is known to disproportionately harm low-income families and minority communities?
Yeah. Well, I didn't downplay it. I actually, in many ways, I upplayed it in terms of action. My action was very strong. Yeah, because what I did was, with China, I put a ban on. With Europe, I put a ban on. And we would have lost thousands of more people had I not put the ban on. So that was called action, not with the mouth, but in actual fact. We did a very, very good job when we put that ban on. Whether you call it talent or luck, it was very important. So we saved a lot of lives when we did that.
So there you go. There's the President of the United States, of course, having someone randomly chosen to be in the studio audience, asking him a question, of course, which is one of the key questions of this campaign as it's being framed as we speak, really, which is your handling of the pandemic. And she chose to argue with him.
It also sounded like it was a specific question related to the Bob Woodward book, and the Bob Woodward quote that went pretty viral in the news the other day. So I'm assuming that's what it was.
All coordinated.
I'm excited to give my opinion on the Bob Woodward quote, because I haven't been on since that's happened. And so I think I'm just going to slightly take us into that direction with respect to that clip, because that's really all that was. It was a gotcha question about how could you, do the whole Woodward thing. I think that the Bob Woodward quote is not as much the bombshell that people think it is. I mean, at the time, Bob Woodward didn't even think it was a big deal. He didn't publish it until 2 weeks ago. I mean, he Monday morning quarterbacked the hell out of it. And that begs you the question: if he thought it was a big deal, why did he sit on it for 4 months when he could have just been like, "Hey, man, the president thinks the pandemic's a big deal."
At least 4 months.
Yeah. Well, I mean, today he's the New York Times best-selling author for the week. So.
Oh yeah, sure.
That was probably a bit of the reason why he sat on it, if he did think it was a big deal.
It's about money.
But when it comes to like this magical revelation that like COVID back then, like that Trump knew it was a big deal before anybody else knew it was a big deal and downplayed it, I don't really think that makes sense if you actually remember what the timeline was and you go back. Like, everybody knew that COVID was going to be a big deal, and we weren't really sure which way it was with respect to like airborne or if it wasn't. But at the time, we all knew it was going to be a big deal. It was how we were going to prepare for it. And Trump saying that he doesn't want to instill, panic. I don't think that that's personally what I want from my leader, but I don't necessarily disagree with it as a strategy. You can't go running around inciting, fear and panic for the state of fear and panic. I mean, let's look at some of the actions from some of the other people that, this very same news media hails as these, great leaders in the field of science and pandemic, combativeness, like, Dr. Fauci. I mean, a lot of Fauci's original policy decisions at the beginning of the pandemic were made for the sole fact of not instilling panic and fear in the people. I mean, why did we not have a mask mandate for the first couple months of the pandemic? And that's because Fauci didn't want to run on masks. He didn't want Black Monday, but for masks. Where people were running on the bank to take their money, but running to the grocery store to take masks.
In which case, the doctors and nurses would not
and
have
people
had
who
masks.
absolutely needed them in hospitals where things were out of control.
And that's because Joe Biden shipped all the jobs overseas to China because we don't make anything anymore in this country.
Yeah, I think it's the thing that bugs me the most about the pandemic is that of all the people who were uniquely positioned to profit off of it, it was the very people who I think we should hold directly responsible for it. I mean, look at who's, medical supply, medical innovation industry. Aside from pharmaceutical companies, most manufacturing for medical equipment, that's made in China.
It is.
They've stand to make the most money from all of this. It's absurd.
They do. And they certainly are the ones that released it. It does make you think. I'm not sure if this has gone exactly the way they wanted it to. So you heard the softball, you heard the hardball question to President Trump, and that was in his town hall. But of course, Biden has his own town hall infomercial on CNN where Anderson Cooper, who pretends to be a journalist, asks Biden a question. We have that clip, and you can definitely compare and contrast when you hear this clip. And here it is.
Would you commit tonight to accepting the results of the election?
Sure. I would like to see the governors enforce mask wearing, period. I can do that on federal property.
So he wants a federal mask mandate.
Wow.
He can do that on federal property, but he was also asked, and by the way, that's just a softball question, right? Do you want a national mask mandate to make sure people stay safe? Well, of course you're going to say yes, and that's not really a fair question anyway because
You can't do it.
it's not going to be enforced. And by the way, when I go outside, I'm not wearing a mask. I just want the government to know. If I'm going inside and I'm going into someone else's property, they have the right to make their own rules on their private property. But on my property and on outside in the public, I'm sorry, I'm not wearing a mask. So sorry, government, you're not going to be able to do that. And then, of course, they also asked Biden about, are you going to accept the election mandate, whatever that may be?
The election results, yeah.
Yeah, the election results. And Biden is like, well, of course I'll accept them. Well, we're going to talk about that later in this podcast, about why they're going to accept them, because they're cheating.
They're going to accept them, and if somehow Trump doesn't win, or somehow Trump does win, they will definitely not accept them. I mean, we'll have basically 2016 all over again.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we will accept the outcome if we win, and we will not accept the outcome if we lose.
Yeah, that's basically the Hillary Clinton playbook.
So it's just so obvious. And this is all working up, podcast listeners, to the 29th, Tuesday the 29th, when we have the first presidential debate between Biden and Trump, which I presume is still going to be in person, and it's going to be hosted and moderated by Chris Wallace of Fox News. And this is all leading up to that because both men are kind of getting geared up with these town halls. But of course, on the Trump side, they're just hammering him, and the media is choosing these people who have an agenda. And of course, ABC has an agenda, and CNN has an agenda. So they just constantly are asking these questions.
Or at least I think is a little ridiculous. Today was the first day of early voting in North Carolina and Virginia and several other states as well. In North Carolina, which is largely going to be seen as a battleground state this year, there were 100,000 votes cast today on the first day of early voting. That was 100,000 ballots that were cast without ever hearing the president debate Biden or the vice presidential debate or any of the other subsequent debates. I mean, and to me, it's like I'm cool with things like early voting the week before the election, but I mean, it is 3 months before an election, 2 months.
2 months. Mm-hmm.
That seems a little ridiculous, because how can you have a properly informed opinion already? Now, some people make the argument that these are partisans.
Part of the cancel culture, right? They don't want to have a debate.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it's stupid. It's taking early voting too far,
It's taking early voting too far, but intentionally, right? So there are two things that are happening simultaneously. Early voting keeps getting earlier, and then the debates keep getting later.
Yeah.
And that's intentional, because the party that sees itself as the most likely to benefit from voting that never ends is the Democrat Party. The party that sees itself as becoming the most likely to gain edge by not having a debate, because they don't like debates anyway, because the modern debate now in America is not on the side of the left. So they really can't have that debate. Now you can say, well, that's because Biden can't debate. You know what? Biden is representative, if he ever were, he's representative of the left, because he's been in office for 47 years.
Yeah.
And he can't defend
Plus,
any of the stuff that he's
nervous.
done.
Oh, they don't even know what he's going to say when he's up there, Mark.
He doesn't know either.
During that town hall, some of the other clips that I know we're not talking about, I mean, some of them, he just was chopped word salad the whole time. It was awful.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I have to say that, your point is great. You have these states that they're already early voting, they're casting votes, and not a single person has watched these two men on the same stage interacting on the most important policy issues of our time.
Yeah.
And therefore you cannot compare and contrast. And to me, that is someone that has a closed mind. That's why I always vote the day of the election.
Or
and
if
I do
fill
so
out
in person.
my early vote, I try to fill it out as late as I can,
Because you want to know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
What if, for example, something came up, which, by the way, it's entirely likely or possible. What if something came up in 1 month's time that Joe Biden was diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's or dementia?
You remember in 2016, I think.
Would you vote for him?
It was like 2 weeks before the election that they had the revelation about, I forget what the girl's name was, but it was the Clinton aide's husband was Anthony Weiner, and the laptop and information relating to her dumping her emails and stuff, a lot of that came out, and the Justice Department actually had to put a release out and say whether they were going to prosecute her or look into it or open an investigation. And that is potentially groundbreaking, stuff. Now, of course, we know that they declined to prosecute or even investigate, but what if that was some Watergate level activity that, was brought to light that's now, you're voting for somebody who's effectively a criminal before ever knowing they were a criminal.
It's a great point. Yeah, you vote for someone who's a criminal. It's too late. Can you go back, by the way, in North Carolina
and change your vote?
And change your vote?
No.
No.
Nope.
And nor should you be able to.
No.
You should have voting. Early voting should be no more than a week. You've got an entire week to get there.
Yeah,
right?
2 months. I mean,
and then you've got the day of the election, and the third option is you request a mail-in ballot, and you get the mail-in ballot and you mail it in. So you have 3 ways to vote, and 3 very convenient ways. And if you can't figure that out, I'm sorry, there's endless voting then. If you can't figure that out and we're saying, oh, no, voting has to be even more extended, including days after voting, which we're going to talk about later, by the way, because now Pennsylvania's done that as well.
Yeah, with the whole memorandums where they're going to accept, absentee ballots dropped in after X number of days after the election.
Yes.
It's just a recipe for disaster.
So there's a second planted Trump question at his town hall with George Stephanopoulos, the fake journalist at ABC News. By the way, he's their senior journalist. Right?
Yeah, he's like the director of news.
He's been their senior journalist for a decade, which is really kind of funny because he always looked like he was 13 even when he started. Now he looks like he's 13, but he has gray hair. So here's planted Trump question number 2. You can tell. And here it is.
So I'd like to ask regarding your recent comments about our United States soldiers and referring to them as suckers.
Could you say that again?
Our United States soldiers referring to them as suckers, and particularly the late John McCain, our prisoners of war, as losers.
Okay. It was a fake statement.
And
go ahead.
Recently requesting to ban amputee veterans from a military parade. How do you expect to win back the support of our military, their families, their friends, and military supporters?
And of course, that was based on a fake Atlantic magazine article that had no sources, or the sources that they claimed to have, they weren't willing to share. And they were all anonymous. So, which we all know is bogus, because they allegedly said this happened a long time ago, but now suddenly decided to write the article right before the election.
Yeah, my thing with anonymous sources is, if you're not comfortable coming on the record, I can't really trust you over the president.
It's not real,
you know, and that would be no matter who the president is. I don't believe in anonymous sources. You know, I think if you're that willing to snipe from within the administration, you should come right out in full view, because at that rate, you're just somebody who has no intention of carrying out your mandated duty.
Exactly. That's exactly right. But I think that they wrote this, they groomed this person to ask the question. They probably wrote the question for her because it's very specific. And it's not something that I think this individual doesn't look like the type of person that believes any of it. And I'm sorry, the whole thing is such a bunch of nonsense when you have these kinds of town halls and you allow phony citizens, and these are phony people, who are getting up there asking questions. I don't think for 1 minute they believe a word of what they're asking. I really don't. I just think they're operatives.
I thought Trump's reaction was funny. He was like really confused for a second. He was like, "Oh, that's right, that. Yeah, all right, there it is. Yep, now I know what you're talking about."
Yeah, it was all fake. It was all fake.
Yeah.
So we also have a clip from the Biden infomercial on CNN. But before we do that, we have to set it up with Attorney General Barr, who spoke at a Hillsdale-sponsored event. Hillsdale College had a sponsored event in D.C., and Attorney General Barr was the keynote speaker, and they also did Q&A with him. And he criticizes lockdowns, and he criticizes the civil liberties that have been lost in the United States because of the lockdowns and the fact that they just don't ever seem to go away. And he also makes some comparisons and contrasts and tries to illustrate with great language, I think, on what has happened in the United States and why it is bad. So we're kind of setting this up for the Anderson Cooper question of Biden, which comes next. But first, we have Barr at Hillsdale College talking about the United States of America in the 21st century in 2020 during a pandemic and how we have lost so many civil liberties. Here it is.
You know, they treat free citizens as babies that, you know, can't take responsibility for themselves and others. So I was saying all along, you know, we have to give business people an opportunity. You know, tell them what the rules are, you know, the masks. Which rule of masks do you have this month? And, you know, tell the business people what the rules are, and then let them try to adapt their business to that, and you'll have ingenuity, and people will at least have the freedom to try to earn a living. But you know, putting a national lockdown, stay-at-home orders is like house arrest. It's you know, other than slavery, which was a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history.
Amen to that. This is without question the biggest intrusion of American civil liberties in American history. Don't you agree?
I had the pleasure of sitting in Bill Barr's confirmation hearing and getting to listen to him speak. Yes, I was in D.C. working in the Senate at the time, and I took time out of my day to go over there and sit. And he's a force. He is one of the most fascinating people to listen to talk, and his way to articulate a lot of constitutional issues from a purely conservative perspective is, to me, amazing, because he hits a lot of it spot on, and you'll see it with when we contrast with the Biden clip, you know, just the worldview of how people look at the world from a political perspective, and keep that in mind when you listen to the Biden clip, because I think it really does help underscore what we're trying to get at here.
It really does, and so we're not trying to rush this because I'm not sure if we have the capability of going back to the Barr clip to hear it a second time. We do. Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Assistant Producer. But first up, we have the Anderson Cooper clip, which asks Biden about Barr's comments that you just heard. And remember what Barr said. And we will give you an opportunity to hear the Barr comments a second time. But first, here's Anderson Cooper asking Joe Biden about Barr's comments and how awful they were. And here is that clip.
The comments by the Attorney General contribute to people, encourage people not to wear masks.
Sure, quite frankly, they're sick. Think about it. Did you ever think, any of you, you'd hear Attorney General say that following the recommendations of the scientific community to save your and other people's lives is equivalent to slavery? People being put in chains. You lost your freedom because he didn't act. The freedom to go to that ball game, the freedom of your kid to go to school, the freedom to see your mom or dad in the hospital, the freedom just to walk around your neighborhood because of failure to act responsibly.
It's completely not what the Attorney General of the United States said.
Definite misrepresentation of what he said, yes, I would agree. But also, look at it. He's basically saying that it was government's job to protect you and that, that it failed and, the people in charge should, be held accountable for that. And it really is, it comes down to the role of government in your personal life. Like, are you able to properly make decisions for your own life and your own circumstances in the way that you think best benefits you? Are you allowed to go to the store? Are you allowed to go to work, make money, support your family? Or is it the government's role to provide that all for you in the event of some national emergency like we're experiencing now? And you really have this contrasting viewpoint. Biden says it. He's like, it is government's job solely to help and fix all of the problems. And that's pretty indicative of basically the entire liberal mindset.
Even if it means
infringing
stopping
on your liberties and your civil rights.
From making your own living and closing your business and making you stay at home for months at a time. Even if. And you're right, that's exactly what Biden is saying. That's what Anderson Cooper is saying in his fake town hall.
Yes.
But Barr also went on to say even more about that in that clip that you already heard, which we will play again for you soon. But Barr is also talking about the fact that, look, if government established a set of rules and they said, okay, we have a pandemic, here is the set of rules that we have, and they're consistent set of rules. Now, you're intelligent, you're an individual, make up your own mind about the best way to implement those rules. By the way, you need to follow the rules, but nonetheless, you get to decide to what extent you want to follow those rules in your own home and also
in your business.
So,
and how you can adapt with those rules. I mean, if everybody had a common set of rules or, a rule based on the area that they're in, and it's the same set of rules, and they were given all the proper information and allowed to make choices within themselves. We always harp on it whenever we're sitting on this podcast. The power of ingenuity is incredible. I mean, Americans have always been able to find their way out of a crisis through the sheer power of our intellectual capabilities, and the result of those things. Look at the Cold War, and look at. My favorite one as an example is the space race. The ingenuity that came out of trying to put man on the moon was far more important to the degree of civilization's progress than actually putting man on the moon. The technological innovations are incredible, and that kind of stuff comes out of giving people the ability to make decisions for themselves, explore options that they want on their own, and innovate in a way that they best see fit.
It's true. So if you live in New York City, for example, and you own a bar, those bars are still closed.
Yeah.
They still are closed after months and months and months.
They were supposed to reopen the schools on today, and then 3 days ago, the mayor came out and said that he's pushing it back off again.
It's crazy.
And then they've done this 3 times now in a lot of these places where they just can't stick to a plan, can't stick to a set of rules because they're so worried about some Twitter mobs, angry tweets at them and getting ratio that they're making public policy decisions based on this, or the teachers union gets them in a room and tells them what they should or shouldn't do. But my disdain for the teachers union is a whole other issue.
Yeah, likewise. But if you have a bar in New York and you still can't open the bar.
Do you know how many people died in New York yesterday? One person.
And that's incredible. And by the way, if you have a bar in New York, like most places throughout the country, by the way, you still can't go up to the actual bar itself and sit there.
No.
You can go up to the bar and order a cocktail and then walk back to your seat and sit down. Now, granted, I know a lot of these bars are really small, so okay, fine. Open the bar up and have the tables 6 feet apart. I know that would still be difficult to make it for the bars, but
at
you know
least
what?
it gives them a chance.
It gives them a chance to earn some revenue.
The amount of people infected in New York yesterday with or I think this week, I think is the number they're up to. They're doing it on a week-by-week basis now. I think it was 60. 60 was the amount of confirmed cases. I mean, that is minuscule for a city of 12 million people. I mean, it's absurd.
It is.
And there's no sign that it's going to change anytime soon. They're basically condemning these people to destitution.
That's exactly what they're doing, and that's Barr's point, is that this lockdown is really attacking all of our civil liberties because some people, for example, if you own Walmart,
you're fine.
Or you're in Walmart, then you're fine. This big mega corporation.
Go next door to the mom and pop. No.
The mom and pop is closed, even if they sell the same stuff that one of the departments at Walmart sells, which is ridiculous. So we want to give you another stroke at listening to this Attorney General Barr clip so that you can really hear what he's saying and how the Democrat Party freaks out when people talk about the basic tenets of our republic, which is the right of movement, free movement, and the right of free speech.
And limited government
control
of your life. I mean, if you could say what was one specific intention of the revolution and our subsequent form of government after, it was to limit the government's ability to control your life.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
Literally was the whole purpose of the experiment.
And no doubt, certainly stopping the government from knocking on your door of your business and saying, you can't stay open anymore because we told you you had to close, so we're going to pull your business license or pull your liquor license or whatever the case may be.
Sick the health department on you.
So listen to this. This is important because this is an important comment of Barr, Attorney General Barr, that is, at the Hillsdale-sponsored event in Washington, D.C. So here it is.
You know, they treat free citizens as babies that can't take responsibility for themselves and others. So I was saying all along, we have to give business people an opportunity. Tell them what the rules are. The masks. Which rule of masks do you have this month? And tell the business people what the rules are, and then let them try to adapt their business to that, and you'll have ingenuity, and people will at least have the freedom to try to earn a living. But putting a national lockdown, stay-at-home orders is like house arrest. It's other than slavery, which was a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history.
So you hear that again. Can we play Anderson Cooper's question now to Biden about Barr? Can we do that one more time? Sure. All right, now listen to this. Here it is.
The comments by the Attorney General contribute to people. Encourage people not to wear masks.
Sure. Quite frankly, they're sick. Think about it. Did you ever think, any of you, you'd hear Attorney General say that following the recommendations of the scientific community to save your and other people's lives is equivalent to slavery? People being put in chains. You lost your freedom because he didn't act. The freedom to go to that ball game, the freedom of your kid to go to school, the freedom to see your mom or dad in the hospital, the freedom just to walk around your neighborhood because of failure to act responsibly.
Yeah, how about the freedom of taking your elderly parents out of a nursing home in New York or in Pennsylvania or Maryland, for that matter, so that you could keep them safe from people like Andrew Cuomo, who put COVID patients in those places and literally killed people, literally murdered them.
Yeah, Biden wants government to be the arbiter of welfare and protection, and you've seen the consequences of that when you have bad governance. Look at the nursing home decisions that states like New York, Michigan, etc. made.
And what we've learned from the pandemic is we can't trust government because now what we've learned is that the lockdowns have been counterproductive in high dense areas like New York City, where they have shared HVAC systems and you're inhaling the same air as everybody else and catching it.
Yeah. And this has been, and I have a very consistent opinion on this because let's examine, the Democrat logic here. The one logic that, Biden wants, and it's not, the arguments of the tenets of socialism, et cetera. It's really just about what level of degree, the government has in your life. And I don't understand how, Democrats can simultaneously think that, Trump is an existential threat to safety and humanity in the United States, while also saying that, Trump's position should have ultimate arbitration over every aspect of your life. To me, it just doesn't make logical sense to have both of those opinions at the same time.
That's exactly right. And we have an example, podcast listeners, of how government, of course there are hundreds of them across the country, maybe by now thousands, but we have a perfect example of what Barr is talking about, the Attorney General, and that is in Nashville, Tennessee. The mayor of Nashville, Tennessee shut down all of the bars and restaurants, okay? And he did so because he said, well, those were the hot spots where everybody was getting COVID, those bad bars and those bad restaurants. And a place like, of all places, Nashville, right? Where people, of course, regularly go out and party and have a good time and want to go see shows and so forth. Well, he did that and he lied because he hid the actual science. And this is what Barr is saying. You can't trust government now with the science, not because the science isn't so in so many cases, but because they're either lying about it or they're hiding it. And so, case in point, so Mayor John Cooper of Nashville, Tennessee, released emails dating to July 29th, not that long ago, which said at the time there were only 80 cases of COVID, not 80 hospitalizations, just cases connected to bars and restaurants in Nashville, Tennessee. During a morning press conference, Cooper said that this was a factor in the city's decision to shut down bars temporarily before the July 4th holiday. By the way, they're still shut down. John Rich, a country music star and the owner of Redneck Riviera, very Nashville, said it was his understanding that Broadway bars were linked to thousands of cases. That's because that's what the city was telling people, that the bars were the bad guys because thousands of cases of COVID were being contracted in them. And he says, John Rich says, when you hear such a small amount of cases were traced back to Broadway, in reality, when you put that across from the destruction that has happened with our businesses in Nashville, the people who work there, it's one of the most egregious things I have ever seen. So the city apparatchiks said thousands of cases from bars and restaurants. There have been 80. By the way, 80 all year.
Yeah,
that they've been able to actually scientifically determine came from
honestly hilarious.
So here's what Barr is saying, right? The Attorney General Barr, what his point is if you think that you might get COVID and you might die from it, or because you're high risk, and if you think for 1 minute that one place that you could get it is in a bar, then don't go to the bar. All right, don't go.
Don't go to the bar.
Go.
But if you're 22 and in great health, and I'm just adding myself because I want to go back to a bar. Anyways, yeah, then go to the bar because you know what? Odds are nothing's going to happen, and honestly, odds are you're not even going to get infected because, as Nashville tells us. But this is the problem, Mark. When people are making policy decisions based on not being outdone by other Democrats or making sure they're popular and doing the popular thing, because none of that served any practical purpose. It was just done because somewhere somebody did it and he was like, oh, well, if I don't do this, I'm going to be yelled at because I didn't shut down the bars, but somebody else shut down the bars and I can't be outdone. So, this is how we do policy these days, Mark. We do it by popular opinion.
It's true. And Biden, conversely, when he was with Anderson Cooper, Biden's point was, well, because there were 80 cases that can be traced to those bars over the course of the entire pandemic, we must shut them all down. Rather than telling people to not go to the bars if you have conditions, as I just said before, we're just shutting them down.
Yeah.
So they don't want to give people the information and then say, hey, use your best judgment as to where you want to go. And by the way, if you're going to go into a bar, maybe wear a really high-end, expensive, fancy schmancy mask if you're really concerned. If you're dying for that beer and you're dying for that conversation in the bar, get the beer at the bar, wearing a mask, go to the chair, sit down, don't have anybody join you. I don't know. I mean, this doesn't seem hard to me.
Yeah, and again, my issue with inconsistent logic, on one hand, the Trump-Bob Woodward thing is this huge deal. How dare he hide things from the American public? But on the other hand, Nashville's okay. I mean, 80 cases. We got to err on the side of caution and put people away, but you're not getting the full story. Look, I believe that you should be entitled as an American citizen to have all the information so you can make an informed decision. You should have known about the risks of your parents being in nursing homes. You should have known about the risks of an airborne pathogen. You should know all the information because you, the American, are independently able to make a decision on how to best protect yourself.
I have never, it's a great point, I've never seen, at least that I remember, I've never seen an attorney general in the United States try to go after a sitting governor, someone who's currently in the position and acting as governor. And I gotta wonder if maybe now would be the time, if there were ever a time to do so, it would be now to have the attorney general at least open an investigation of the governor of New York and his decisions and his directives to send people to nursing homes. Because that created even more havoc in the United States where people became terrified, understandably so, of this pandemic. And so what they did was they said, well, because government can't manage anything, we're going to shut everybody else down who, the very people that are good at managing things, the small businesses.
Honestly, I don't hate that idea. I think it is really worth exploring, in some capacity, just where they failed. Like what brought you to such, to me, an asinine solution to a problem? Like, no matter what, you should always be worried about the elderly. I mean, throughout the millennia that human beings have been around, I mean, the way we've approached pandemics and disease has always been the same. Take the people who are most at risk and hide them, and the rest of you, live and figure it out. But we literally did the exact opposite. We basically, put all of the sick people in nursing homes with other elderly people, and we hid all of the healthy individuals who probably should have been out, doing normal things. And it makes no sense. And I'm quite curious to know what really was the internal decision-making process that led to that policy, because
and it should be investigated.
I think New Yorkers have a right to know. I think people who lost loved ones especially have a right to know, and I think the American people should have a right to know, because ultimately, if this is, in every 100 years we're going to get hit with a pandemic, type thing, then we should know for the future.
One thing I think is for certain is now that the Chinese have realized the incredible damage that they've done to our economy and to our psyche. It's not going to be 100 years. I think it's coming back.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that COVID in particular, but something, and that they're going to have this happen again. So listen to this, podcasters. So speaking of Joe Biden has been in office for 47 years?
Yeah.
47 years he's been in elective office. And back in 1987, Joe Biden was running for president of the United States for the first time. Think about that, 1987. It's now 2020. And Joe Biden was trying to get the nomination, the Democrat nomination, for the 1988 presidential race. Understandably, who was running in 1988 on the Republican side?
George H.W. Bush.
He was then the vice president under Ronald Reagan. And he was W's dad, and W's dad, George H.W., was running for president of the United States as a Republican, but Biden was trying to capture the nomination in 87 of his party, the Democrat Party. Well, in so doing, he decided that he wasn't, and he's never been the brightest guy, let's face it.
No.
He decided to copy speeches. And
lazy.
So he would take entire speeches as well as entire paragraphs and multiple paragraphs of speeches.
Kind of lightly edit them. It basically, Biden's campaign speeches looked like your college papers, people. Let's be honest. You copy and paste it out of Wikipedia, you changed a couple of things, you hit submit, and then bam, good to go.
Biden was that guy, I have no doubt, in college that certainly undergrad, he would copy and paste the notes, what is it called? Cliff's Notes?
Yeah.
He'd copy and paste them, and probably that would be his test,
Yeah.
And so
he takes pride in that. Actually, believe it or not, he admits to it. He's like, yeah, in undergrad, I was a C student. I was an underachiever.
The guy's an idiot. He's a complete idiot. So this is 1987. Think about this, listeners. 1987. And even in 1987, he was a laughingstock.
Yeah.
Because this just came out, and kudos to Gateway Pundit, who just put this clip out. So The Tonight Show was hosted by Johnny Carson from 1962 to 1992. And in 1987, this is when Johnny Carson was making fun of Joe Biden and his plagiarism. And for those of you that really don't know the Tonight Show, it was then after Carson became Jay Leno, then Conan O'Brien, then Jimmy Fallon. So that kind of gives you the lineage of who's been there. Well, Johnny Carson obviously was a legend. He's deceased now, but he had great writers and he had a great way of landing a joke. And so here's Johnny Carson. We have a clip of him making fun of Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's plagiarism in 1987, folks. Here's the clip.
Now, on the political scene, one of the Democratic candidates is Senator Joseph Biden. Have you seen the problem he's been having? He went around and made a speech. And apparently, he quoted I think it was a British politician, took his speech and kind of paraphrased it as his own. And then the press got on him, and then he was charged also with taking part of Bobby Kennedy's speeches. And Biden says, not to worry, he reassured his staff. He said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
1987.
Oh, that was good.
Can you imagine? 1987, he was a laughingstock of the United States of America when he was running for president of the United States because he was a liar and a cheat and a faker, a big faker.
He'd ran 3 times, and he had that all happen all the time. Honestly, he owes President Obama everything he's got now because, I mean, that man plucked him out of political obscurity and made him his VP nominee.
He really did.
You kind of hit it on the head. I mean, prior to that, aside from 1 or 2 bills, and one of them he won't even stand by anymore, the 94 crime bill, Biden didn't do anything. He was kind of a laughingstock of the Senate.
He is, but you know what? When you hear him in his clips, Biden, he does his way of acting like or sounding like he's tough or smart is by yelling. His voice would get really high and loud. And
yeah, Jack.
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually fantastic. I got to say, kudos to Gateway Pundit for pulling that out because nobody, think of all the media outlets, no one's pulled this out of history until Gateway Pundit just pushed this out recently. I think it was 2 days ago. So next up, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court grants the Democrats' request to extend mail-in voting deadline, the deadline for mailing in your ballot, to 3 days after the election. I thought elections were date certain, where at the close of that day, the election was over in terms of voting, but apparently not in Pennsylvania. So here's what it says. The state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, which has a 5-2 Democratic majority, granted the Democrat Party's request to order a 3-day extension of Pennsylvania's Election Day deadline to count mail-in ballots. And it ruled that the Green Party's candidate for president did not strictly follow procedures for getting on the ballot in November and cannot appear on it. So therefore, why do you think they did that? Because the Green Party candidate, who actually legitimately should be on the ballot in Pennsylvania, would take away votes from Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think it's a dull way of looking at it. I mean, I understand why the Democrats are fearful, but I think they misunderstand why people vote Green Party. And it's because they hate Democrats. It's stupid. But they think that if there's not an option,
they're not green enough, is what.
Yeah, they think that if it's not on the ballot, then they're gonna vote for Biden instead. But honestly, they're probably just not going to vote. But nonetheless, I have a huge issue with extending the election for 3 days after the election because. We have put the election in a place
vote counting.
Where
they're still vote counting 3 days after the election. The election is over and the voting is ended, and that's it. But they're still counting votes because votes are still coming in.
Yeah, I want to know. I would have to look. I'm really concerned. I want to see what they say about whether the ballot has to be postmarked by a certain date or not a certain date versus whatever. But. I don't like it because it is setting us up for a place where we're just not going to know who won the election the day of the election. And I don't think the pandemic and its effects should have necessarily created such a circumstance, I really thought that this rush to go to all online, mail-in balloting, all mail-in balloting was rushed, and for a lot of these states that have, eliminated polling locations and, you have one per county now or whatever, and you all got to wait in line there if heaven forbid you want to go in person, then you should all vote through mail. It was stupid because I mean, Mark, no offense. If I can go to the grocery store, I can go stand in line for 5 minutes and go vote. Now, I know there's an issue with poll workers.
If you can go to Walmart,
yeah.
If you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot, you can vote.
You can vote, yeah. I mean, it's really, to me, it's a little absurd. But
it is.
This is where we are because, winning the election is so important.
But this shows why the judiciary is increasingly so messed up, though. It's important, but it's so messed up in America because Pennsylvania has a legislature. They make laws, and the governor signs laws. And in Pennsylvania, there is a law, and the law is that you got to vote on Election Day, or you got to vote by absentee ballot, or you
sure
vote.
That's also a federal law. So
or
I'm
you vote
interested
early.
to see if there's a federal challenge to
the
this.
Supreme Court of Pennsylvania is acting like the legislature.
Yeah.
They're literally changing the law.
I would imagine there's going to be a federal challenge to this because I don't see how this would stand the scrutiny of federal law. I mean, the federal government sets the election date for November 3rd, and the president is in itself a federal entity. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out because it is 2 months, so there's plenty of room for some fun legal challenges. But hey,
you want some more details about this?
Give me some. I'm quite curious about this.
Ballots in Pennsylvania that are eligible to be counted must be postmarked by the time polls close and be received by county election boards at 5 p.m. on November 6th, 3 days after the November 3rd election.